So the topic is your rules, your reality. So let's start off by actually getting clear on what is a rule. A rule is something that you believe that you have to do in order to have a consequence or not have a particular consequence, actually. So a rule is a law. Laws are also rules. And beliefs are rules, and rules are beliefs. And judgments are also based on all our rules. So, the next important question, the Course in Miracles always talks about purpose is everything. The most important thing to discover is what is it for? There are actually two purposes for rules. Now, the Course in Miracles, as Camilla said, the underlying purpose of everything in the world is to keep us separate. That's in this dream, we make up bodies and we make up the whole ego script to keep us separate because we've chosen this. What would it like to be separate? So underneath everything else is this goal to come up with a set of rules, a whole ego script. Actually, the whole ego script is rules. One rule after another. One belief after another. So this is the underlying goal of rules, is to keep us separate, unique, and special. Always. So I'll just read from the handout. The real and hidden purpose of rules is to help keep the separation and our sense of self in place by making us feel guilty, and we'll get back to that, making us feel guilty and looping in the ego thought system. Our rules are built around and firmly rooted in the unholy trinity of sin, guilt, and fear. I'll explain this in a moment because it's not obvious. The less hidden purpose is that we create a thought system or a set of rules that tells us what is good and bad in the world, how to be in control, and how to feel safe in what we consider an evil and cruel world. So it's about keeping us safe, putting up boundaries, but also the more clever one, things like, what do we do in the kitchen and so on. They don't seem like they're to control the world. They don't seem like to keep us safe. However, most of our rules are unconscious. We're not aware of them, and as I heard Camilla say, I wasn't even aware that these were rules. I didn't realize how important they were until I actually started to look at them. So they're just chugging along in the background, and we keep making up new rules, like when you move into a new house, it's like, where do you start putting things? They become a rule that you always put your blankets in this cupboard, or you always put your plates in this cupboard, or your cutlery this way, and so on and so forth. And it might be a different rule to what you had in the previous apartment, but very soon it becomes a rule or a habit. So most of our rules are unconscious, and they eventually become an integrated part of our very existence. We perceive these rules as our reality, the truth to which we ourselves and everyone else must live and obey. So once we've made these rules, other people must also abide by these rules. Not consciously, it's very unconscious for most of our rules. Now the key point of this whole looking at this issue is that rules make us feel guilty. Again, this is not obvious, and I'll explain why. And as we go through the Course in Miracles, you'll see how these steps, I'll give you this handout. A rule is a defense. As we say, it's a boundary or something like that. It is a defense to keep things safe, in control, whatever. So it's a form of defense. But we also know that a defense is an attack. When I defend myself, I am attacked. And if you look at lesson 135, which says, If I defend myself, I am attacked. So a defense is an attack. And even in war, like, how do I defend myself? By shooting the enemy. See how it's an attack. A rule is therefore an attack. Again, we're not aware of it, like when we decide where I put things in my cupboards in the kitchen. I don't realize that's an attack as I'm doing it. But if Mariana comes in my house, she takes things out of the cupboard and always leaves them everywhere. She never puts them back, and if she does, she puts them back in a different place. And up comes this feeling of irritation, right? And you can start to see how this rule that I've had is actually an attack. And if she doesn't put it back in the place and I feel this irritation, guess what? I feel guilty because now I'm feeling attacked towards her. So even though it felt quite normal to put these things in a certain place, underneath that is a setup for an attack. And this is the clever ego trick. It's all about the setup. So a rule is there for an attack, and attack makes me feel guilty. So therefore, a rule makes me feel guilty. This is the fundamental truth behind every rule that we cherish, that we really hold on to. Which is why rules can be said to be the heart of all our guilt. So at the bottom of all our ego script is a set of rules or set of laws that we make up. We usually don't notice this guilt, but the moment we are in a situation where one of our rules is broken, the guilt emerges from its hiding place. So the guilt is sitting there waiting for one of our rules to be broken. So how do our rules get broken? There are two main ways. One is if you break my rule, and the other is if I break one of my own rules. You could say this, putting things back in my house when Mariana comes, this is where if she doesn't put it back where I expect it to be, is the expectation, then she's breaking one of my rules. And up comes the irritation. So why the hell doesn't she put it back where I want it to be? So if there's any irritation about it, I know that I have a rule, that it has to be put back there. Another one that she and I bump into very often is where I break her rule. She has this thing about there must never be any water left on the surfaces in the kitchen. Right? And even if it's her own water that she's left, she still thinks it's me. So we had a lot of fun about this after we got irritated and angry about it. For heaven's sake, Mariana, it's not important. Which is one of my rules. And so, how do our rules get broken? Rules give the appearance of keeping us safe and in control in this world. However, it is impossible to live in this world without our rules getting broken. When you break one of my rules, I feel guilty. My rules are my defense, and this defense inoculates me. Do you know that word?
Inoculates.
When you get a vaccine, you get inoculated against a disease.
Mm-hmm.
So this defense inoculates me, so to speak, with a latent guilt. So as I said earlier, you don't feel the guilt when you decide that everything must be in that particular place. That comes to life the moment your rule and mine conflict, when you break one of my rules. I will perceive such a conflict as if you are trying to break down my defenses. Again, this is not conscious. But if Mariana says, why can't you take the water away? And I'm thinking, but it doesn't matter, right? I perceive her as breaking down my defenses, and consequently that she's attacking me. And I will defend myself and attack back. If I perceive that you're attacking me, I will defend myself against you. And as we have previously seen, any defense is an attack which gives me guilt. So any rule gives me guilt. The more subtle one is when I break my own rules. If I have two rules about something and they conflict, I have to break one of them. Now I'll give you an example. It happened last week. I went to the cafe down by the lake where I live. And there is a rule actually at the cafe that you don't bring your own food, which is quite a normal rule. So I've taken on that rule. I don't take food or drink down to the cafe. I buy their coffee. Right? However, I invited a friend along to join the cafe, but when he arrived at my house, he had a flask of very special coffee that he wanted me to try. Right? And it was such a nice day, I still wanted to sit looking at the lake at the cafe. So we went down there and we kind of like, I thought we'd better sit in the corner where the boss doesn't see us. But guess what? The boss came and wanted to feed the goats, which is right next to where we were. And I had these two blue cups, which is very different to their cups. He didn't seem to notice. But the next day, I went there and bought my coffee, and he said, oh, I noticed you brought your own coffee yesterday, but as you're such a good customer, we won't say anything, which he had already. So, when we were drinking that coffee, I was breaking my rule of we don't bring coffee here. But because I wanted to please my friend, I had to break one of these rules. So I broke the rule about not bringing your own food or drink here. In the morning, when the boss, Sebastian, spoke to me and said, we won't say anything because you're such a regular customer, I could have just said, oh, thank you. But because there was guilt underlying there, I got into a whole story about why it happened. I got into an explanation of, oh, my friend came along and he had this special coffee he wanted me to try and stuff. And as I finished, I thought, oh my God, I fell for it. So this is what happens when your own rules conflict. It cannot be avoided that at some point my own rules will conflict. As soon as I experience such a conflict, my latent guilt will be brought to life. So I was sitting there drinking this coffee, hoping he wouldn't come. We most often experience this as an unbearable internal conflict, which is why we are forced to sacrifice at least one of these conflicting rules. When I break one of my rules, I feel like I'm removing my defenses. I will thus feel that I'm laying myself open to attack and that you were attacking me, which is why we are back in the same case as we were before. All my explanations, excuses, defense speeches, etc. are an attempt to myself and everyone else to justify that I have broken one of my rules. This alone shows that I feel guilty about having broken one of my rules. So let me ask a question. What is the difference between when you're with someone it feels very easy to be with them, and with other people it feels very difficult to be with them? So why do you think this is?
Maybe conflicting rules?
When you have virtually the same rules, it's very easy, and you feel compatible with that person. Yeah, you may have similar interests as well, but when you feel like this ease of flow with somebody, it's because your rules don't conflict. When you have conflicting rules, it can feel very challenging to be with that person. So being with people who have the same rules as myself, of course, is easy and makes my rules seem just good and righteous. And we love to be right. This is one of the ego's primary goals, is to be right. Being with people who do not have the same rules as myself can bring up feelings of uneasiness and irritation and cause conflict and ruin relationships. Now, believe it or not, just this thing about the water with me and Mariana could be enough to break up the relationship. I mean, it serves the bigger picture, of course, but that moment where it hits and I get angry or she gets defensive or whatever could bring us to the point where this doesn't work. It can be as small a thing as that can end a relationship. Now this is perhaps a very important point. Even the slightest irritation or anger towards someone is because I have a rule that does not agree with yours. And I'm convinced that my rule is the truth of the reality. So the slightest irritation means our rules are conflicting.
So how do we free ourselves from this? Is it recognizing this is happening right now?
Exactly, and this really is the last part of this. What we're doing here is how do we handle this? And of course it's forgiveness. Forgiveness is the master erase of everything. And as we know by now, that forgiveness is looking gently. And one of the reasons that we keep looking at the ego script from different angles, that's really all we're doing on this course, actually, is looking. But like, we've never looked at rules as a topic, and like you were sharing, it's like, I didn't even know these were rules. But now I see. And these ahas are what we need in order to do the forgiveness, because now you know what to look at, gently. Yeah.
So when I'm in a hurry and people are walking very slowly in front of me so that I don't reach the green light, I can say, I'm doing this to myself.
I'm doing this to myself.
It's a rule.
Yeah.
I'm creating a rule. And I'm doing this to myself. This single lesson will set me free.
Quote unquote. Yeah, because the ego wants it to be the other person who's wrong. You know, they work too fast, or they speak too slow, or whatever. One or the other, doesn't it? Either will irritate somebody. Yeah. So the ego will go out there and make the other one the bad guy. And as you say, we bring it home, okay, this irritation, I'm doing this to myself. And look at it gently. You don't have to try and change it, fix it, understand. Who was it wanted to understand? Was it you? Yeah. Not about understanding, right? The only thing we want to understand is actually how the ego script works. And this is what we're looking at now, is we're being told that this is how the ego works. And no one taught us that before. No one said, rules will make me feel guilty. No one's ever said that. In fact, in the world, we're told, oh, you must put up borders. Mm-hmm. You must defend yourself. Yeah. Yeah. And at the beginning, it's probably a good idea to do that. But ultimately, we will let go of all of these rules, all of these borders, and become defenseless. You can still say no to something, but it's not coming from a rule or a defense. It's just simply, no, I'm not into that right now. So as always, it's always back to true forgiveness.